there comes a moment when the silence inside you stops being quiet and starts sounding like an echo, not an empty echo, but one that remembers something you no longer do. It's like walking through your childhood home, long after everyone has left, and hearing laughter. That doesn't belong to this time anymore. That's what happens when the soul forgets its own language. We think we've grown. We think we've moved on. But maybe we've only learned how to speak louder, not deeper. When we were young, we didn't need words. A glance, a pause, a moment of stillness, that was enough. The trees spoke to us through their movement, the rain through its rhythm. Even the cracks in the walls seemed to hum something only we could understand. But then came the noise, the instructions, the endless need to name things before feeling them. And little by little, the soul began to stutter. It didn't stop speaking. We just stopped listening, because its language isn't made of words. It's made of pauses and wait and things left unsaid. You can't record it. You can't write it down. You can only remember it in the moments when your life grows very quiet. Like now, the rain, the dim light, the slow breath you didn't notice you were holding. This is when the soul begins to whisper again, not in grand revelations, but in the gentlest memories. The smell of rain on the windowsill, the sound of a mother humming in another room, the first time you forgave someone without meaning to, each one a syllable of a forgotten language. And it doesn't demand you to understand. It only asks that you listen, because what we call meaning is not something you chase. It's something that arrives when you become still enough to hear it. But stillness frightens us. It feels too much like the end. We've learned to fill the silence before it fills us. Yet, that's exactly what the soul longs for, to be filled again, not with thought, not with plan, but with presence, the kind that doesn't need an answer, the kind that doesn't fear not knowing. Sometimes, when you close your eyes and the sound of the rain merges with your heartbeat, you can almost hear it. The language, not made of sense, but of being. It's slow and kind and impossibly ancient, and it knows you. It knew you before you began to name yourself, before you learned what it means to be someone. It's the hum you felt as a child when everything was still whole, when the world hadn't been divided into what matters and what doesn't. You didn't know it then, but you were fluent in the language of the soul. Now, you're only remembering, and that remembering hurts, because every word of it undoes something you've been holding too tightly. The soul doesn't speak in progress. It speaks in return. Return to what was always waiting for you, to the soft gravity of simply being here. You might call it peace, or maybe grief, but they're the same sound, heard from different distances. And as the fire flickers and the rain softens, you begin to see that nothing was ever lost, only translated too many times, until you forgot how gentle the original voice was. Somewhere along the way, we stopped feeling and started describing. We began to trade experience for explanation, and every time we named something a part of its mystery, died, we said love, and it no longer trembled. We said grief, and it no longer breathed. We said peace, and forgot how quiet it really is. Language became our shield. We used it to tame what frightened us, the vast, wordless ocean inside. But the soul was never meant to live in sentences. It moves like weather, not like grammar. It arrives in the silence between two thoughts, and leaves the moment you try to find it. That's why so many men, so many of us, look calm, but are aching. We've built walls of meaning around the heart. We've translated every ache into something understandable, and in doing so, we've silenced the thing that wanted to sing. Understanding was supposed to save us, but instead, it made us forget how to feel, because the soul doesn't need to be understood. It only needs to be heard, and to hear it, you must step beyond words, beyond the noise of what you think things mean, beyond the need to explain what you are. There's a moment, a sacred one, when a man stops trying to describe his life and finally starts living it, when he sits with his pain without narrating it, when he lets his tears fall without turning them into stories, when he looks at his reflection and doesn't ask why, that's when the language returns, not as sound, but as knowing, a quiet knowing, like the way you know the rain is coming, before you see the clouds, like the way you know someone loves you, even when they don't say a word. It's soft, and it's always been there, but it requires a kind of humility, the kind that comes when you've grown tired of your own explanations, when you realize that all your searching, all your self-improvement, all your understanding were ways to avoid simply being with yourself. The truth is, you were never lost. You were only too loud. The soul never stopped speaking. It just refused to compete with your noise. And so it waited. It waited through the storms you caused, through the promises you broke, through the nights you pretended not to care. It waited because it knew something you didn't, that eventually you would grow tired enough to listen again. And in that exhaustion, in that holy weariness, you would rediscover the most forgotten language in the world, your own. It doesn't sound like much. It isn't impressive. But when it returns, you'll know, because everything begins to soften. The air, the thoughts, the edges of your name. You start speaking slower. You stop correcting yourself. You stop explaining your sadness. You begin to notice that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Not every silence needs to be filled. And not every question has to be answered. This is how the soul begins to heal, not through learning, but through remembering. Remembering what it felt like to trust the quiet. You see, there was a time when your silence was not emptiness. It was presence. When your solitude wasn't loneliness. It was listening. When your gentleness wasn't weakness. It was language. But the world taught you differently. It told you to be stronger, sharper, louder. And so you began translating tenderness into fear. You began translating softness into shame. You began translating being still into being nothing. And the soul, the patient, wordless witness within you, went silent, not out of anger, but out of mercy. Because sometimes the only way to protect truth is to hide it until the heart is ready to hold it again. And now, as you sit here, listening to the rain fall over your memories, you can feel it, that quiet stirring, the faint pulse of something ancient, the part of you that remembers how to exist without definition. This is not nostalgia. It's recognition. You're not returning to who you were. You're returning to what you are. The difference is everything. There comes a night when even memory grows tired, when the echoes of all you've said, all you've tried to be, start to dissolve into the soft hum of rain on glass. It's not surrender. It's not defeat. It's something quieter, something older. You stop reaching for meaning, and the world, for the first time, stops resisting you. You realize that your soul was never gone. It was simply waiting for the noise to fade. And when it does, it returns like breath, unnoticed, until suddenly you can't live without it. There's no grand moment, no awakening that shatters the sky. Just a small, ordinary piece, the kind that doesn't need to be shared. You begin to move slower, not because you've lost energy, but because you've lost urgency. Every sound feels softer now. The rain, the wind against the window, even the crackle of the fire. They all seem to speak the same language you forgot. It's not a language of words. It's one of rhythm, of presence, of quiet acceptance. You find yourself smiling, not from joy, but from recognition. You remember this. You remember being this. Before the names, before the need to prove, before the endless rehearsals of who you thought you should be. You were this, a pulse in the great silence. And for a moment, that truth is unbearable, because you realize how long you've been gone, how much time was spent chasing versions of yourself that never needed to exist. But then, something miraculous happens. You forgive yourself, not in words, not even as a thought, It's more like the air itself forgives you, the way the rain forgives the earth. Simply by falling on it again, you feel the weight leave your chest, not because you've healed, but because you've stopped hiding. The soul doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. And for the first time in a long while, you're here, completely. The quiet inside you isn't frightening anymore. It's warm. It's alive. It's home. You begin to see the sacred in the ordinary, the beauty in the unfinished, the holiness in things that break but still shine. The world hasn't changed, only the way you see it has. Now you notice the kindness in a stranger's nod, the forgiveness in a morning sky, the love in your own reflection. Even after all you've done and all you failed to be, you understand now. The soul never forgets its language completely. It only whispers until you remember how to listen. And when you finally do, you hear it everywhere. In laughter, in silence, in the spaces between heartbeats. It's not something you learn. It's something you unlearn. You unlearn the fear that silence means nothing. You unlearn the idea that love must be loud. You unlearn the belief that healing is an ending, because healing is only remembering. Remembering that peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the acceptance of rhythm. That love is not possession. It's permission. That truth is not certainty. It's presence. There's a curve most people never see, a quiet bend in the journey, where running finally turns into resting, where the seeking stops, not because you found the answer, but because you finally understand that you were never the question, and there, in that stillness, you find it, the soul's first word. It isn't spoken. It isn't even sound. It's a feeling, gentle, timeless, alive, a wordless yes. That fills everything it touches. And when it arrives, you realize something beautiful. The soul never forgot its language. You did. And now, as you sit beside the fire, the rain outside tracing soft patterns on the window, you understand why silence was never empty. It was the sound of your return. You breathe, not to fill the air, but to join it. The past no longer asks for your attention. The future no longer asks for your effort. Only this moment, this still, quiet pulse, asks for your presence. You are home, and you don't need words to say it.